Climate change is, I think, the most urgent issue of our time because it will affect literally every person on the planet, and it will affect the natural systems that we all depend on. So in order to address the problem, it really requires everybody who is a leader in really every sector to engage in the issue and to figure out how they can make a contribution. What we really need is a transformational change in the way energy is produced and used throughout the world. And then there's the whole issue of adaptation and resilience. So in cities, our mayors, our county leaders, all will be wrestling with the impacts of climate change on their communities. So really projecting forward and figure out where the investments are and how to protect their own populations is something that they will have to take very seriously and figure out how to engage in. So I cannot imagine a sector, actually, which is not engaged in this issue. And I know across the environmental spectrum where I work, originally we looked at it largely as an energy issue, but it's a health issue, it's a land use issue, it's an oceans issue. It really just permeates society in the most fundamental way. You know, we're always looking at the energy sector because that's where a lot of the problem comes from. And there hasn't been, I think there's been increasing recognition of the problem, but the fundamental business design has not really changed yet. And I think that will actually come as a result of public policy, both at the international level and at the country level. But I think on the sustainability, for example, one company that is just constantly looked at for really being a leader in the field is Unilever. Paul Pullman, who's the CEO of Unilever, has just really made this a priority in his business and in his leadership, and he's engaging a lot of people in his sector, other business leaders in that as well. There's the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which has many, many, many companies. I don't know how many engaged in it. And then also at the World Economic Forum, this is the issue of climate change and sustainability generally has become a much more prominent topic than it was, say, 10 years ago. So, I think it's in a learning mode. I don't think that just individual CEOs and individual companies leading is what we need. We really need fundamental shifts. And so whether, there are a lot of laggards even when they're leaders, and we need everybody to be brought along. Businesses can have a huge impact on the problem because they're a huge part of the source of the problem, particularly if you're in the fossil fuel sector. The increase of carbon emissions in our atmosphere is coming from fossil fuels, so it kind of resides directly with them. But that's because there's a huge demand across society, and they are supplying for the demand. So we need a fundamental shift where there's a lot of alternatives that are much greener. This is so fundamental that this cannot be done company by company in a voluntary way. It's just not going to work. And I think if you look, for example, in the United States, where we've had tremendous success in reducing air pollution. We've had tremendous success in reducing air pollution because we have a law, the Clean Air Act, that was passed 40 plus years ago that made, regulations that everybody was required to comply with. The growth of solar worldwide. A lot of that started with Germany because Germany put in place policies that really benefited the world because it really brought down the price of solar panels significantly, precipitously over the last few years. So where solar didn't used to be able to compete with fossil fuel, both solar and wind are competitive with fossil fuel energy sources at this time. And this is still a very fast-moving area, how panels are designed, how efficient they are. Solar panels have, not only have they dropped in price, but they become much more efficient, so they're producing a lot more energy. I just imagine that will increase more and more as time goes on. And also, batteries are a hugely important part of the equation. There's a lot of investment going into batteries and trying to figure out what the solution to the battery technologies are. And I think that over the next 5 or 10 years is just going to be very, very significant. I think the change is accelerating. I do think what we've seen in other sectors is once things begin to happen, that suddenly things happen a lot more rapidly than anyone guessed. And I think that will happen in the sector of clean energy. I don't think we're at the tipping point quite yet because there's still a lot of resistance to it. And I also think there's some fundamental challenges. If you look at, for example, a country like India, where 400 million people have no electricity at all, and coal is their primary source of energy at this point, I mean, there's a lot of renewables that can be put there, but the shift to clean energy is just going to be a very challenging one for them to make. So I don't think we've reached the tipping point. I think the tipping point will be reached, I would say, probably in the 2020 to 2030 timeframe. Things are going to happen much more rapidly. And, whereas I would say maybe half a decade ago, people were looking at this is such a problem, we don't know what the solutions are. That has really shifted. I mean, now people, I think a lot of businesses look at this as an opportunity rather than a problem. I mean, it is a problem, but it also is an opportunity. And, I think I talk to young people, around the country, and they all are eager to be involved and try to solve it. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for figuring out what are the solutions and putting them in place. So I think a tipping point is coming. I don't think we're there yet, particularly in the United States, where there's a lot of political opposition to addressing the issue, which I believe is pretty much representing the fossil fuel interests. But that will change too.